Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for inviting me into your home this week. And as you can see, we're going to jump right into it. I am joined by guest Spencer Schneider, and he is the author of let's check out this title, Manhattan Cult Story, My Unbelievable True Story of Sex, Crimes, Chaos, and Survival. And with that title, I was intrigued. I was absolutely sold right from the get-go there. Reached out to Spencer and said, hey, how'd you like to come on my show and talk about your experience with this group? And he agreed to do so. So Spencer, thank you for doing so and welcome to my show.
Thank you for having me. It's my honor to be here to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, I am honored as well. Now, you are a person who practice law out in Long Island, and you are also a professional lifeguard and teacher of lifeguards. Is that right?
That's right. I've been a lawyer since 1987, and I practice in Manhattan and also in Long Island. I do corporate litigation. And after I left the cult, which is the subject of my book, I became a lifeguard. I trained to become a lifeguard, and then I opened up a lifeguard school.
Awesome. Well, in a way, metaphorically as well, you know, we are lifeguards out there trying to prevent people from getting drowned in cults, and that's what my channel here is all about. And on that note, I think already we can see that we are busting the trope that you have to be a stupid idiot to join a cult, because you clearly are not that. Have you run into that?
Yeah. I mean, people. I mean, that's I think what I wanted to explain to folks was that it doesn't matter what your background is or your circumstances, that you could be dragged into and allured into a cult or any kind of abusive situation, irrespective of, whatever your background is. And in fact, I should add on this point, which is that one of the reasons I didn't think I was in a cult was because, and I'm sure you felt the same in your experience and others in non-traditional cults, in the sense of we weren't, blood-sucking, worshiping some demon or some, or that we were on a compound somewhere. We weren't. We were living our lives. And since the group that I was in, the cult I was in, didn't fit any of those criteria, I figured, okay, I'm not in a cult.
Exactly. There were two things about your experience I found fascinating right from the get-go, which was the length of time it took to actually acclimate you into the situation, because you didn't even really meet your cult leader, if I have this right, for about a year.
That's correct.
And the fact that it was very bright, intelligent, philosophically minded people that you were connecting with, and it appeared to really be some kind of philosophical, intellectual club that you were going to. And as I understand it, you were sort of semi-recruited into this by a friend or an associate?
Yeah, I was recruited into it by someone who I didn't know that well. But I knew him as, extremely bright, highly educated, going to some of the top colleges in the world. And we had great conversations about things, although they were a little odd in that he got personal and took kind of a very deep interest in me that I found a little unusual. But he just seemed earnest and whatnot. But yeah, the group were people were are highly educated, and that was what they targeted. So their pitch, if you will, was designed for people like myself and yourself also.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that is a fascinating thing. In the same way that Scientology will market itself as to its own membership as what we want to make the able more able. That's how they describe their target demographic. They don't want to go down and deal with the insane or the bums on the street or, people out there who don't have money. In other words, it's sort of coded language, really, but it's appealing to this sort of highbrow, intellectual minded kind of person, a reader. You have to be a reader to get into Scientology. And you had, if I remember this right, you were sort of, they were dropping names of philosophers you'd never heard of before. I'd never heard these names. Who were these people, and how did this inlet sort of work for you? What happened with you?
Well, I was a philosophy major in college, and then I went to law school. And let's say by this point, I was 29, several years out of law school already. It was in the late 80s in New York. And they told me that, number one, this group was secret, that it was an esoteric school, and that it existed in order to help people get what's known as a second education, which had to do with one's, spiritual life.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. That's interesting. Right. And the name of this was really just the school.
School.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, it all sounded, in one respect, extremely suspicious, but also, kind of dull in a way. Nothing particularly odd. It was certainly interesting because they mentioned these two philosophers who I'd never heard of, Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, who I think a lot of your listeners may recognize. They were the fourth way adherents, well known in the 60s. Calling them philosophers would probably be like calling L. Ron Hubbard, a savior.
Got it. Yeah.
Or a messiah.
Right.
I think the only people who think that are him and maybe his followers.
Right.
But there's not much to them. Certainly what they had to say was interesting and whatnot, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I didn't know them.
Right. Right. and so there's a little bit of a mystery created there.
Exactly.
Right. Right. Yeah. What are all these people gathering around, these clearly intelligent people talking, debating, whatever, intellectualizing about this? And the thing I find so fascinating about this is there was not a lot of love bombing, as we call it, right? Where you're getting gratuitous amounts of admiration and awe and love and this kind of thing to get you involved. It was more presented as this intellectual pursuit. So it was non-religious in nature, and it wasn't immediately talking to you about spirituality or improvement or something. It was really just kind of this dullish kind of intellectual thing.
Yeah. Although there was this personal element to it, which it wasn't, I didn't recognize it as love bombing, but I guess you could say it was, but it wasn't, there was this element. I don't know how to characterize it really, if it's on the extreme spectrum of it or not, but certainly what I noticed at the beginning as they were recruiting me. And by the way, I did not know the recruiting system involved this kind of show that they put on for me, which was the person who first told me about it, asked me to meet another member. And the other member was a woman who was extremely beautiful and also very bright. And the two of them, we went out for a drink, and the two of them just had this tight relationship that seemed so unusual and special. And the depth of their interest in me, especially her interest in me, and my, psychological, spiritual life, which I really wasn't in touch with or aware about, was quite breathtaking in a way and alluring.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
So there was that thing, you know, and I saw this relationship between the two of them. I didn't know if they were like sleeping with each other or what, but it was something intense.
Right. There's this deep connection there that you noticed.
Yeah.
And it was interesting.
Like, okay, what is this? You know?
Yeah, that became a draw by itself because you were not, there's this classic idea, and it is a well-founded idea that a lot of people will get into these groups or get involved in a high control or authoritarian group because they are experiencing some massive change, trauma, loss, significant mental or emotional experience that has them reeling a bit or confused or upset. And this group will come and offer support, succor, help, assistance of some kind, and people will gravitate toward that or seek that and need that. But you are not really in a needy kind of a situation, if I have this right, yeah?
Not really. I mean, I think I was disenchanted in my work in the sense that I was working so much and I was reassessing, like, well, was this corporate law thing a good idea? I'm working all the time. I'm not having any fun. And I was sort of reassessing what would give me meaning in my life. But I wasn't, I was certainly looking for something more, but it wasn't necessarily a group or anything, certainly nothing spiritual, and definitely not a cult. That's for sure.
Right. Well, not too many people are looking for that, unfortunately. They find it because it's presented as something else. And I'm only harping on these beginning points a little bit because this is an interesting thing that, how covert the recruitment can be. This is one of the things that I was absolutely fascinated by your story is how not almost non-eventful, not heavy duty love bombing, not a situation where you felt you were in crisis in your life. Certainly, you were not happy with things and you wanted to make a change, but that's something I think a lot of people would be willing to fess up to. Very different from a full-blown crisis in your life or something like that, But
yeah, no, they were very sophisticated in their recruiting, very selective in terms of who they wanted in it, because they wanted people with money. And
but they really took their time building it up for you.
Yes, because they asked a lot. Yeah. They asked a lot. They asked us to keep it secret.
Right.
And that was a very big ask for a lot of people. And if I hadn't have trusted him that much, I wouldn't have even considered anything like that. And, the cult exists to this day, and yet they somehow manage to get people to maintain its secrecy and to not look online.
Well, I'm familiar with that because, of course, in Scientology, the thought policing that goes on it's the most powerful form of thought policing there is when you can be convinced to police yourself. Because that's when they don't have to be watching you 24/7. You're watching yourself 24/7. And, keeping it secret, don't look at all that stuff. If you have those walls put in place yourself, it's all good. You're going to be a good, secure cult member.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's 100% right. If it's within you and you're indoctrinated and really believe it, then they don't have to worry. And we were,
exactly. Well, let's talk about how we got there. So you're involved in this thing, and after about a year of, now you were just kind of going and having these discussions with these people about mildly interesting philosophic matters, and then I guess about a year in, you lost your job, and that's when things sort of sped up the process, or what happened exactly there?
Yeah, sure. So it was actually, I lost my job sooner, but like you say, there were moderately interesting meetings that we met twice a week in a loft in Tribeca, And like with the first meeting I went to, I noticed that folks were, like me, they were well-educated people coming from jobs wherever downtown. And, it was just arranged as a sort of a classroom in this nondescript loft. And we sat around, and there were two leaders who spoke about Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. We read the books. We came in with questions about the books, and then we started to talk a little bit about our personal lives. And everyone, brought in questions, and the idea was to apply the ideas to your life. And in the first month, I lost my job, and that was a crisis for me. And they were extremely supportive to me that first night. I'll never forget that, and encouraged me to, open my own law practice, which I did. And that alone really snared me in a certain way, because I felt that the support and love that this group gave me the strength to carry on. And I felt I owed my initial success to this connection with them. And I was afraid, I came to be afraid that if I left the group, I would lose that support and my business would go away. This was a fear that carried me along for a long time.
I certainly understand that. And that fear of loss is a very real thing when these are your allies. This is your support system in a way, which it sounds like this sort of became for you.
Right. Right. I mean, they became a support system unlike anything I had had before, because, they were extremely non-judgmental and forgiving and lovely and kind. And, it's kind of like, well, it's not really a great example, but I mean, we always had new recruits coming in later on when I was in, and we went out of our way to be kind and non-judgmental and supportive of people who came to the group. And if they didn't use the right language, because the group had its own language, like all cults, and if people didn't know the exact language, well, we would correct them gently and tell them, well, no, you really should be saying it this way. And they'd be thankful and grateful. And you could see how happy they'd get. And, they were kind of like the little kids, like your little brother. You'd be really nice to them. And then when they're older, you could start abusing and harassing and beating the shit out of them.
Right. Right.
I don't know. I just said a bad word. Am I allowed to say that?
Totally fine. Yeah. This
Okay.
We're a not safe for work podcast.
No, we're not safe. So, in other words, that's love bombing. We would just be like,
at such a subtle level. That's what I'm fascinated by about this. It's almost an intellectual love bombing in a way, and cults tend to be a bit sloppier about that kind of thing, a very obvious, very even obnoxious levels of flattery and that kind of thing. And it seems like your experience was a bit more muted.
Yes, and I took great pains to try to write it and explain it that way. It was a very slow burn.
Right. Which is also unusual, because they weren't hitting you up within the first couple of days or weeks. This really slowly rolled out.
Yeah. And I think that's why they were effective with a lot of people.
I think so too.
And again, not everybody would stay. People would leave, and it was always new people leaving. But once they had you for a year or so, you would tend to stay longer. And, if you were in for 2 decades, like myself, it's almost unheard of that people would leave after such a length.
After such a commitment.
Yeah.
So what did you say? It was about a year or so before Sharon actually made her first appearance in your life?
That's right. So the leader, her name was Sharon Gans. She did not appear for about a year. We had other leaders, the main one being Fred Mindell. And, we didn't know much about Fred. I didn't even know his last name. I just knew he was the leader of the group. That's all we knew about him. The other thing is there was this very strict rule of not fraternizing with people outside of the group.
Oh, so, what's that now? Did that get put into place for you early on?
Right away. I mean, that was a key thing, was that we were prohibited from talking to anybody who was not in the group about the group. So spouses.
Oh, about the group itself. Got it. The first rule of Fight Club is don't tell anybody about Fight Club.
Exactly. But if you saw somebody else who was in Fight Club on the street, you would pretend you didn't know them.
Right. Just not even acknowledging their existence.
And you didn't call up anybody else on Fight Club, and you didn't know what anybody else did. We didn't know what anybody else did. We didn't know any people's last names. I didn't have any numbers or anything. When class was over at night, we were to follow an hour of silence and meditate on what was said in class, and not share cabs or anything like that.
How interesting.
Yeah. So they wanted people only, and the idea was, well, you're forming special relationships with people here, not life relationships, but work friendships. And that's different. That's a better relationship. It's a deeper relationship. And you know what? There was something to be said about that. We didn't talk to other people about like our daily life issues, which, that's actually the whole point of friendships, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it sounds very, very interesting that way. So the idea was that it was a focused activity where you were there to learn, to grow, to, talk about these things, meditate on them. But it was not a meetup.com group where you're going to fraternize and socialize with these folks outside of that situation.
No, although they did hold up that possibility if you later on wanted to, meet up with somebody romantically or whatnot, you had to ask for permission.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. And sometimes it would be
which was ultimately sought by many people, right. And that led to a lot of marriages that people sought out, but also with the leader setting up people and arranging marriages and sort of taking people apart from marriages. Like I was in an arranged marriage, which had very special stresses on it because of the ostracizing rule, which is that if anyone left the group, the marriage would end.
Right. Right.
Which I'm sure sounds familiar to you.
My marriage ended when I left the Sea Org. I completely get it. Right. I have since remarried to somebody who's never had any cult experience, and
good.
Yeah, whole different life now. But very much when I left the Sea Org, I was leaving my wife too, and that was a known thing for me. And I was married to her for 17 years in the Sea Org, right? So I totally get that. So when did so this kind of salon meeting activity, a bit intrusive, a bit kind of weird, but not outrageously so. When does it start? In your experience of this, does things start kind of getting weird? And what happened?
Well, I that's a good question, because I didn't answer the previous one, which was Sharon Gans, and that's when it did get weird. Now, I should say I liked it a lot, in that year. I liked the support. I liked the people. I didn't think it was weird. I thought it was kind of cool. I had this little secret group, and the philosophy and thoughts that Gurdjieff had, although I had some difficulty with them, overall, by and large, I liked. And I could see that other people in the group liked them and seemed to be helping people in their life, giving them confidence. And I liked the leaders at the time. But then one night, a strange woman appeared. We had no idea who it was. They didn't introduce us. And finally explained that this was their teacher, and the leader of the group. We just told her name was Sharon. We didn't know anything about her. She didn't say anything about her. She looked really odd.
She looked odd?
Yeah, I mean, she had a very, her appearance, I thought she was nuts. I mean, she had a bizarre appearance. She had this, first of all, she was much older than us. We were like all in our early 30s. She was probably in her 60s, which is how old I am now. So she was an old lady, right? And it's so funny. But she kind of dressed like she was in a Shakespearean play, just like just this odd, very flamboyant, like a queen, and she carried herself in this regal way. She had very bright red hair and these deep blue eyes and very pasty skin, and she was shown such deference by our leader Fred that it was very it was an uncomfortable situation. It was an odd appearance. So, we ended up, a lot of people left after they saw her, actually. A number of people left. And I think they kept her away from us for a while because I think she understood that people would either, have very strong reactions to her. I think that was what she knew. Now, we didn't know anything about her because there was no internet. So I hadn't known her history and that this group had a very sordid past and a very bad history of being in San Francisco, being accused of being a cult, and then kind of run out of town from San Francisco. And they restarted in New York, but really underground. I didn't know any of that.
Right. You would have had to have literally either gone to San Francisco, known to go to San Francisco, or done some sort of deep newspaper archive search or something in order to be able to find that back in 1989, 1990.
Yeah, there was no way. I did a Lexis search, but I didn't know her last name. I had done a Lexis search of, Fourth Way Gurdjieff, but there was no real information out there that I could find quickly.
Right. Right. So her very appearance is enough to turn some people off, but you stuck with it. And what happened after that?
Well, she proved to me to be someone who, although, a little nutty and a little scary and intimidating, to be able to have the ability to make you feel empowered and strong and really feel confident about yourself. And that was the sense that I got from her.
Oh, that's interesting. And was that just through conversation with her that you would feel this way, or what could you describe that more?
Well, it was all very formal. I didn't have any direct conversation with her.
Oh, okay.
Alone. It was only in the class, which was about 60 people. And you could, ask a question or to her. And if you had the guts to, ask her a question directly when she was there, because she wasn't there all the time. She would come once in a while. But I did ask, and, she was extremely positive towards me. And others, and at least initially, this was sort of a new round of love bombing, if you will. It took time till it turned. The big turning point, I guess, came in about 1.5 years. So just about the same time we met Sharon was that we were asked to start recruiting other people. And we learned sort of this recruitment manual that they had of who they would recruit and how. And it was very surreptitious and very sophisticated.
Interesting. Method. And this was literally a manual?
Well, I call it a manual because
I mean, we had manuals in Scientology. That's why I ask. I mean, it's a very documented cult. Scientology is, but so that's why when you say things like that.
No, we didn't actually have a manual, but
okay.
it was, I call it a manual in the book, and I did take notes when we were taught how to do recruiting, which we call third line of work, which is a very particular phrase that Gurdjieff and Ouspensky had about recruiting. And, I took notes and I lay it out in my book. I call it the recruitment manual because it pretty much was. And it's, several pages of the criteria of who we look for, how we would meet them, how to talk to them. And it's basically how to vet and lure them at the same time, because we were very specific requirements. People had to make a certain amount of money. People had to look a certain way. They discriminate against Black people and gay people.
That's interesting. So there were no African Americans or Blacks in the group at all? No. What about any other minorities allowed, or was it just white people?
It was mostly white. I think a few Asian people, a few here and there, but Sharon was also very homophobic. And if we did recruit people who were gay, they had to have an ambivalence about their identity and agree to Sharon's version of conversion.
Oh,
where
wow.
She would marry off gay people, straight people. And this was kind of one of the more insidious things that she did, among many other horribles.
Right.
But so that was really the but there was a whole other bunch of criteria, mostly about how much you made and whatnot, and how we would talk to people and sort of gain their confidence, and then ultimately, make it an invitation to them, just like we had been given, and it was a secret one.
Right. So when you were learning this process and starting to engage with it, did you relate it back to your own recruitment process as to what happened with you? Did you see how that played out according to?
Yeah, it was the same thing.
Okay.
It was the same thing. There was some slight differences because of just the circumstances, but basically it was the same thing. And it's what they do now.
Right. So, hey, if it works, old ways are the best ways. How did the money work up until this point? Had you started paying into this thing, or did that come later?
No, the first month was free, and then it was $300 a month.
$300 a month. Wow. For 2 meetings, like eight meetings a month, basically.
Right.
Huh. Okay. $300.
And then there were additional fees. It wasn't like a terribly big amount.
Well, you're all upper crust working professionals, so
exactly.
It's targeted to be, a nice amount for. It's not nothing, but it's certainly not any. You could certainly afford it.
Right, but it was enough so that the leader made over $1 million a year,
just on those membership fees.
Yeah, cash.
Oh wow. Okay.
And there were other things that she sought and received through the years. There were people who would make a bonus, and she would say, "Well, where's my half?" Or, "Why don't you give it to me, since I helped you get the bonus by helping you with your job, and why don't I have my own access to a private jet? Why don't I have these jewels and this and that?" And ultimately, she lived quite a luxurious life, lots of real estate. She passed away a year and a half ago, but like Scientology, it goes on. Because
absolutely it does. If there's money to be made and property to be had, then people will move it forward. Just like with Scientology, David Miscavige took over after L. Ron Hubbard died, and he's in some ways arguably worse than L. Ron Hubbard. A hard argument to make, actually, because they're both awful in different ways. But but the idea of of somebody else taking over is not uncommon at all. And
didn't he grow it? Didn't David Miscavige grow the organization?
Not exactly. It's a little complicated. The
Okay.
heyday was actually just before he took over, but he sort of reestablished the Central Church's dominance and did get their tax exemption back in 1993. They'd lost it
I
under
see.
Hubbard, and that was his big move that
I
solidified
see.
his leadership. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
But interesting that even the Sea Org members, even the people like myself who were in the Sea Org working at the fanatical cult level, we were making $50 a week. That was our pay. And when Miscavage's birthday rolls around every year, we were all expected to donate to it, so that he would be purchased things for Christmas, birthdays, other special occasions, right? We were always at the pay line being coerced into giving that money over for him or
Right.
other Scientology leading, executives. So again, same, right? It's not dissimilar
Right.
at all. Interesting. So you meet her, you're getting involved in this recruitment process. You're just kind of becoming deeper and deeper involved in this thing. And you mentioned this is when things start getting kind of weirder. Tell me what happened.
Well, my 23 years, I sort of split up into two halves,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The first half was I wanted to be there, and the second half I did not.
Okay.
Within the first half, there were some crazy things that happened that certainly made me question things and made us all question.
Mm.
But we, meaning the group of people who were in it, were really happy in the sense that we had this great community that was really unusual. And there were some real high times, like some fun and, cohesiveness and support and this great community. But, we did see Sharon switch from being extremely helpful and loving to her help, quote unquote, help being extremely harsh and very manipulative, yelling at people, just demanding that they follow her instructions about all kinds of things and crossing boundaries that, you would never let anybody cross. So she got involved in people's, work lives and whatnot, but in a very deep way. And also in people's sex lives and marriages. And, she would break up couples and then have them recouple with other people. She encouraged women to, instead of having abortions, give up their children to other families in the group. Again, gay men were married off to straight women. And there was just this sort of oppressive, she was an oppressive and frightening woman, but also could be, extremely kind. But
Right.
the turning point came, I think, at a certain point, like halfway came, where several of my friends left the group. And I was inclined to leave as well, but I didn't. And what kept me in were two things: my marriage, because my then wife didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay in it. And I didn't want to lose the marriage. It was pretty new. And the other thing was that I had just started to do work with someone, a client who was in the group. And although he wasn't, my biggest client, I didn't really want to lose him. I knew I would if I left. So I figured, I'll just put up with this for a while. Maybe I'll just put my nose to the grindstone and get more involved in this and like it more and love it more and whatnot.
How did it work that one of the other members of the group was your client? Were the regulations about fraternizing or meeting outside the thing lessened over time, or as you got deeper in, or how did that work?
Yeah, no, the regulations didn't change, but there were opportunities you could ask Sharon, say, "Oh, look, So he asked Sharon, well, can I do work with Spencer? Because, he seems like a good lawyer and whatnot.
Okay. So as long as Sharon gives her blessing, it's all good.
Exactly.
Got it. And how would you explain to somebody how she could establish this level of domination or control over a person in terms of their life? Was it you were involved for years here and going to this classes twice a week? Were there lectures? Was it sermonizing, or was it an open discussion format? Or how did this work where she became this authority figure for you and these other people?
Yeah, it was always sermonizing in a way. The way she led classes, and again, she wasn't there all the time, but the classes were pretty much the same where, the leader would say, let's talk about this idea tonight. And people would bring in questions about the theoretical ideas of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. The main thing of Gurdjieff is this thing called self-remembering, which is supposedly the way towards consciousness. That's what the whole idea here was, that Gurdjieff and Ouspensky said that mankind is asleep, and the only way to awaken is by being in fourth way schools such as theirs.
Okay, so that's the transformation that's being sought. There's a transformation or a transformative experience being looked for, and you're on the hook to get that.
Exactly.
Got it.
Right.
Okay, because that's what keeps you coming back.
Exactly. So we think we're trying to remember ourselves, and he had certain levels of man. There was 7 levels of man, and
so this was a sort of ascended master kind of deal. You're rising up levels of awareness or ability.
Consciousness.
There we go. Okay. In Scientology, it's spiritual awareness and ability.
Yeah.
Same concept, though. You're graduated series of steps you have to accomplish, and Scientology, it's so well formulated that there are price rates for each level and this kind of thing. It sounds a little looser for you, but tell me more. Tell me how this works.
Well, yeah, no, there were like 7 levels of man, and most people are in the bottom 3. But then you get to 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. And Sharon would say, Christ and Buddha and Moses, they're all 7s. And she said, while she wasn't quite there yet, she was close.
Interesting. So, only because your first impression of her was, this is a weirdo.
Exactly. But, there's an answer for everything, Chris. To a lower man, a higher man appears weird.
That's right. Oh, tell me all about it, man. I hear you.
Yeah. So I think your listeners need to, I'm sure all of your people talk about this, but, this sort of logic, common sense logic does not play in cults.
Right.
They have their own language and their own tricks to always make them right and you wrong. And there's just so many. I'm sure you probably could write a book, and maybe you have about.
I have. I died.
There you go.
Yeah, totally. Just like you, I totally get it.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's sort of because the cult system is this sort of a closed loop system, and
closed loop. Yeah.
Right. Once you're in it, there is no bringing outside stuff in. Everything sort of circular explains itself, right? And
exactly.
And then the language reinforces it all. It's called loaded language. It's a
loaded language.
Very powerful control mechanism is language, right? Because you literally control how a person thinks if you control the definitions and concepts that they're thinking with.
Right. And we didn't understand the language as well as they could. And their part of the premise was that they knew more than we could. Right. They could see us better than we could. And that basically, there was even a saying that you're always wrong in connection with your next step. And that the teachers could see you better than you could, that you needed to give up your will to the teacher, or you could never lie to them. And, I mean, it was any independent thinking was viewed as a bad idea, not because we didn't want the idea is that you would become independent thinking, but right now you just don't have that. So you have to think the way we give you a paradigm to think. It's a whole brand new way to think. And that eventually you'll have independent thinking. But for now, no.
That is so parallel. Hubbard would say we have to control people until they graduate up to a level where they can control themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the old ways are the best ways. These are old school control techniques.
It's total fascist. It's like this fascist thinking.
Yeah, very much.
Anyhow, but that
was kind of how you got reeled in and stuck there.
Yes, and that's when I say that, like, when I was there halfway through, I figured, let me double down on all of these ideas, and I'm probably not doing them right.
Yep.
Now that I'm here, I'll make the best of it. Double down, become a more serious student, because no one's ever a good enough student.
Right.
Nobody was ever good enough. Unless they were the favored one week, and then next week they were a piece of shit. So,
so you had that sort of reputational balance going, where you're in one week, out the next, trying to gain favor, get back the status hierarchy.
I've read a lot about abusive relationships, people in abusive.
Yep, it's called trauma bonding.
Yeah, it was really quite strong, and that dynamic played out time and time again, and it was extremely painful because I saw other people going through it. I went through it, and ultimately, that's kind of why I got out. Because when I kind of woke up a little bit to the whole situation, I mean, I guess to answer like how and why I got out. I mean, number one, I did get divorced in 2010, although I didn't leave the cult until 2013. So that the fact that I was no longer married took away one big reason to be there. But certain things that happened with Sharon, and I became extremely close with Sharon. She seemed to have a great fondness for me for whatever reason. I wasn't particularly giving her any, cash or money or anything more than anybody else. But for whatever reason, I was part of her inner circle. And, I go into this in the book more about like how that happened and what it was like. I was like her chauffeur at one point.
Wow.
So, we spent a lot of time and together alone outside of the group. Part of the group also had Sharon would take us to her retreat, her ranch in Montana.
Oh,
she
really?
had a 50-acre ranch in Montana. She would take some of the favored students to that group, to the ranch, once a summer. And so I spent a lot of time there with her and with other people. So, I felt this sort of special bond to her. But at a certain point, I just saw that she didn't really give a shit about me too much and was happy to let bad things happen to me from the group without her showing any real concern. And so eventually I just I saw that going on. I was also having a nervous breakdown and was having suicidal ideations, which is not a good thing. And I got myself to a therapist. And then I started, although I didn't speak with him about the group, I actually, for the first time, told other people about the group. And
it broke the first rule of Fight Club.
Exactly. And once I did that, it was like people were like, this doesn't sound so good, Spence, And then all the people who I had left, all my friends who I had left in the earlier years were now like they were there for me all of a sudden. And so that was good. I kind of rediscovered those friendships. And then I created new friendships at about the time I was leaving because I joined the swim team. That's the swimming piece, lifeguard piece. And I joined the swim team. I'd always been a swimmer, but I'd never been on a team. And that gave this sort of new community that I had and a sort of allowed me to have a sort of soft landing. I didn't realize that, but that's what it was.
Right. Right.
And then, in January of 2013, I told them I wasn't coming back. There was a lot of back and forth with them. They wanted me to stay. And, I just said enough.
Right.
And that was it. But I was in a bad place, but at least I was out.
Exactly. And you can just start, crawling out of the hole that you've dug yourself into at that point.
Right.
Totally get that. And actually 2013 is, the year that I got out of Scientology, and it's been 10 years, 9.5 years of a lot of work to recover from that, so I understand. What were you recovering from, would you say? I mean, how far down that rabbit hole did you go, and what were you experiencing at the worst of this thing?
Well, like I say, I mean, the biggest thing was suicidal ideation, a lot of anxiety and depression. Obviously, I mean, I should just say, when you talk about suicide, just if people are listening and they have these issues, there's help. You could call 988. That's the suicide prevention hotline, and they'll talk to anybody confidentially 24 hours a day. And that is, I luckily was able to, I found a very good psychiatrist. And I mean, my mind, was sort of still in the cult. My body was out, but my mind was there. All the ways I thought, they were all this framework of the quote work. And so it was a very bleak it's a very bleak mindset. And I had actually no self-esteem and was second guessing myself all the time. And I felt the best days were behind me. Among other things, I did have other challenges, including, having lost that client. So he had become a very big client of mine. So I had to sort of restart my practice. But the things that really changed it, helped me were, this camaraderie with swimmers, and my love for swimming and the beauty of it and the depth of meaning I found in that. And then getting real help from a psychiatrist helped me enormously. Like I say, reconnecting with old friends and finding, new meanings in life that, I never had.
Right, exactly.
That were not dependent on anybody else,
Was there ever any giving from the group? In other words, you were mentioning you chauffeured Sharon around, or there was work that was being done sometimes. Was that ever a paid gig, or was it just, I have the privilege of driving Sharon around now?
That is the best rhetorical question I've heard all day.
Fair enough.
They just don't. I mean, The thing is, they don't, but they seem like they do. I mean, it's the classic narcissist makes you think that they're so good to you and they're doing so much good for you, but they're really just taking from you. I mean, we paid for the privilege of doing forced labor for them.
Right. What kind of forced labor situation did you get into there?
Well, when we went to Montana, we were constantly building and working and maintaining this property.
I figured that was the case.
A day.
Yeah.
When we were doing all this recruiting, which took an enormous amount of time because you could imagine not everybody is interested in this, or their criteria were very specific, and to find a match hard. To do that, we were building the space where we met. Sharon's other homes needed to be worked. People cleaned and cooked for Sharon. I cooked for her. I was a chauffeur for her. I never got gas money or anything.
My
I mean,
goodness.
it was just you name it.
So she really kind of created her own little catering army for herself, for her life.
Yeah, I mean, and people did. People bought her an apartment in the plaza for $8 million.
My goodness.
Yeah.
My goodness.
But you never heard of her, right?
Yeah. No, I actually never have. This is the first. I mean, I've now Googled her. I see who she is here. Died in January 22nd, 2021. And her Wikipedia page straight up says she was an American actress and cult leader.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
wow.
Here's the thing. It's not well known because nobody has written about her except me. It's the first book about it. I have a blog where I talk about it, and it's not anonymous. There is another blog out there. It's excellent, but that had been anonymous until, a few years ago. So there's really, people don't want to talk about it, not because they're afraid of getting sued like Scientology. And you're pretty brave for doing this because, I don't know what they've done to you, but they come after you. My group doesn't have to come after you because nobody wants to talk about it because they're ashamed.
Right.
And afraid of having feel like, they'd have been so stupid to be in a cult. I mean, it's quite amazing and sad. But I had to overcome my self-blame because I was a victim here. I was not to blame for this.
That's right. Exactly. And believe me, I understand that curve,
I'm sure.
Yeah. I really get it. And the fact that you are speaking out is actually a very good thing. And it will lead to more. And I see here that, there have been a couple articles this year in the from the New York Post and Daily Mail about this Odyssey study group is what they're calling it.
Yeah, and, that's right.
And there are some people now. I'm just looking at headlines here, but as of September 21, there's a Stephanie Rosenberg and Marjorie Hochman filed a lawsuit against the group. So so now there's this matters. I want to highlight this. You speaking up, you writing a book, you going on podcasts, other people stepping up and doing something about it. This is the kind of exposure that people need to wake up to realize, oh, this happens to ordinary people, rich people, all the time. It's not just, this is not a poor person phenomenon. This tends to target, more upper crust, middle class, upper class people, because it's all about the money,
Right. So this is right on. And I should have acknowledged Stephanie and Marjorie because they put their names out there and are suing them.
Yeah.
They're
bold.
being attacked in this lawsuit by the cult as being disgruntled.
Of course. Now, they have an axe to grind.
Their suit is valid. I've read the suit. Their suit, they're claiming that they did all of this work without getting paid, and hopefully they'll win. Let's see what happens. But
we'll be watching that. Well, it's interesting because they don't have what they don't have going for them, and this is a plus for you guys. Is they're not a religious group, so they don't get to hide behind the First Amendment, which makes them more like NXIVM, makes trafficking and nonsense that goes on in these groups a little easier to go after. But I think you'll appreciate as a lawyer that we lack coercive control laws with teeth.
That's right. Right. Well, I do think there are laws that some prosecutors have been able to use with success, like in the NXIVM trial, and also the Lawrence Ray trial, the Sarah Lawrence cult in New York, where those trials did involve, sex trafficking and forced labor and other forms of on other crimes. But the thing that I think that the prosecutors were willing to do and able to do in this changed environment after Me Too, the Me Too, is to show that people can be psychologically manipulated into doing things that are against their interest, even though it seems to be voluntary.
Exactly. And that's the coercive control element, and the fact that there's this repeating pattern of behavior. Any one incident or thing you could almost write off or rationalize as, well, it's voluntary, or they did it because they said they would, or whatever. You can kind of write it off. But you see this repeating pattern of this, and you see bank accounts being drained, and you see, and lives being controlled. And this is what we really need codified, so that we get these people to stop getting away with this nonsense wholesale.
Yeah, I don't think existing laws are strong enough for it.
Not yet, not here.
I think they have to find a good way to codify it. Maybe it would be good. I mean, but.
Well, you might be interested in a 2016 law that the United Kingdom passed on the subject of coercive control. And if I think of it all, well, I'll try to send you a link or an article on it after the show, just for your interest. Because now there's an effort. It was a domestic violence coercive control, family domestic situation, which is now being rallied. There are cult exit folks and people in that lane, my lane, who are now trying to push that law. Hey, let's get this applied to these groups, not just to family situations. Right. And they have successfully prosecuted husbands, wives, people who, coercively control their spouses. Why not go after these cult leaders who successfully coerce groups of people at a time?
Right. Well, I mean, that's exactly what this lawsuit is going to try to do under existing laws, and we'll see if it works. I mean, the law in New York is you can't have people work for free. And, their argument is, well, it's voluntary. And our argument is not mine, but their argument. And I share it. It wasn't voluntary, it was anything but. It's coerced. So we'll see if the judge goes along with it, if a jury agrees, and, they'll see. But I think that it would be good to have more laws on this. Yeah. And it's also good. I write about like the hallmarks of a cult. I mean, I found a lot of people have found that helpful. I list like 9 things at the end of the book about what I think are the hallmarks of cults. And the big one is coercive control. And that separates it from things that, that are groups where people are maybe, passionate or even fanatical about it. But just because you're fanatical about something doesn't mean that it's a cult.
That's right. That's exactly right. There's a whole lot of people who are very fanatical about their sports teams, their celebrity crushes, their, anime or whatever. And that does not have to be a cult. You can definitely be all in on something and it not have to be a cult. But when you add the coercive control on top of it, the manipulation, the abuse, up to labor and sex trafficking, now we're talking about something really, truly awful. And
well, I just want to add before we finish a very important fact here, which is that the group it exists now, but they do not call themselves school anymore. They don't use the name Odyssey Study Group. They say that they're the study. They do something called the study. They don't say we have a name. They don't mention Gurdjieff or Ouspensky. People do not read Gurdjieff or Ouspensky. So new recruits are really left in the dark. And they're also discouraged from looking on the internet. But most people who are in their 20s, that's like saying to you and I, don't drink Coca-Cola out of a can.
Good luck with that.
You raised on that stuff.
Exactly.
What are you going to do? Only drink it from a bottle will be like, go to hell,
Exactly.
So the kids are not obeying that. Some are, I guess, but the ones who are not are calling me and, that's great. So I hope if any you're all out there, if they call it the study or whatever, that's, give me a call and I'll tell you what you should do.
Excellent.
Get out.
Yeah, exactly. Get the hell out of there. Run, don't walk. Well, once again, let me promote this for you. This is the Manhattan Cult Story, and it is my unbelievable true story of sex, crimes, chaos, and survival. And you can get this book. I'm looking at it here on Amazon, Kindle version, audiobook, etc. So I definitely recommend you all check this book out. It sounds fascinating. Thank you. Yes. And thank you again for taking the time to be on my show and tell us some of your story and experiences. And, I think as we've shown, it lines up pretty with the Cult 101 model.
Right.
But the variations can be tricky. And I really wanted to highlight that intro because it took a long time for this to get, truly insane for you. And people tend to think wrongly that these groups are like on you and within a couple of days they're going to be draining your bank account, and it really isn't that way, and
no one would stand for that.
That's right. Exactly.
Nobody.
Exactly.
And they know they're hucksters, so they know exactly what they're doing. It's very deliberate. Which also, let me just add one more thing in terms of crimes. I mean, there are laws against mail-in wire fraud, and those are federal laws, and there's common law fraud. Well, there's claims for fraud, but these are all frauds. Right. I mean, they promise one thing, but they're something entirely different. There's not too many people who are out of my group who aren't miserable in some way.
Right.
Probably the same with yours too.
Pretty much. Yeah. A lot of depressed, anxious folks there. I can say that.
Yep. For sure.
All right, Spencer. Well, again, thank you very much. And we'll wrap up now. And for folks out there in the audience, I want to thank you very much for inviting us into your home and listening to what we had to say this week. I hope you found it entertaining, informative, and maybe slightly educational. That is the goal here. And of course, if we are accomplishing that, then feel free to help support the channel through PayPal, Patreon, etc. Links are in the description section to this video and every video on my channel. All right, folks, I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.